Great. Are we live?
Yes.
Great. Okay, we're live. Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. I'm Delegate Robin Lewis, and you have joined the Land Use and Ethics Subcommittee of the Environment and Transportation Committee in the Maryland General Assembly. It's Tuesday, February 25th. Thanks for joining us. We're going to get started reviewing some legislation. So we're going to start with House Bill 286. Ben, would you be so kind and walk us through? This is a little complicated, but Ben's going to walk us through.
Okay, I appreciate it, Chair Lewis. HB 286, the title is Local Comprehensive Planning and State Economic Growth, Resource Protection, and Planning Policy, Planning Principles. The departmental bill from planning. It's cross-filed with Senate Bill 266. There's no fiscal impact. There were amendments and testimony received that were requested. The Senate bill, the cross-file I mentioned, has crossed over to the House. What this bill does, HB 286, as well as the Senate bill, it replaces the 12 visions that a local planning commission must implement through the comprehensive plan of local jurisdictions with specified planning principles. There's two parts of the bill that's taking place in the land use article, and then there's corresponding changes that are also being made in the state economic growth, resource protection, and planning policy section of the code. This was a background. This was last updated 15 years ago, I believe. And the intent is to update it with current practices and I guess an updating on principles as well. So with all of that in mind, as I mentioned, the Senate has voted their crossfile out and it's now in the House. And the reason it may be helpful to look at the final version that came out of the Senate with the Senate amendments is because it represents the work that MDP has done to address the testimony that the Senate received, but it's also the testimony that the House has received for the House bill. Depending on the will of the subcommittee, whatever the amendments, if any, that they want to adopt sounds, is up to the subcommittee, but it could be considered the amendments that have come out of the Senate, again, because they were made to address the testimony that we've received. So as I've mentioned, there were several pieces of favorable with amendment testimony submitted on House Bill 286 and Senate Bill 266, the cross-file. There was also one piece of unfavorable testimony. So with that understanding, Madam Chair, I would propose addressing the testimony that we received because there's a number of them. There's several pieces of testimony from several entities. I could go through all of them all at once. To group them and then give MDP a chance to address them if that's acceptable to you.
That sounds like a good strategy. Thank you, Ben. So if you'll group them and let planning address them, we'll go through it that way.
Okay. Right. And the first thing I'll say is there was favorable testimony received from DHCD and MNC PPC. Now, the first piece of testimony that sort of stood on its own that was favorable with amendment for HB 286 was from the National Association for Commercial Real Estate, also known as NIOP. In their testimony, NIOP was stating that they believe it's appropriate to consider and revise planning visions as has been done. But however, they were saying that they referred the bill to their land use planning and zoning review group and would like to work with the department, MDP, on proposed planning principle changes. However, it was kind of just to my knowledge, that was what their testimony was, and there wasn't no direction or specific edits that they were requesting. I don't know if MDP has anything on this point.
Would you like us to go ahead?
Yes, please.
Okay. Good evening, Madam Chair.
Oh, good evening, Madam Secretary. Yes,
Hi,
thank you
everyone. Boy,
for
you
being,
all are great. You're out there doing this work. I really appreciate you. Um, NAOP, actually, we had an excellent presentation and conversation with the group, and my interpretation of the outcome is they were very happy with where we were going. They just needed more time. I think that more deeper dive that we took with them in our meeting to explain to them, more detail what this was, the implementation guide that we'll be doing outside of regulation. And my takeaway from that meeting is that they were very positive and in support of what we were doing. And that occurred just within the last couple of weeks. So I guess they didn't do any kind of follow up, but that was our takeaway from the meeting, is that they're good.
great. So,
We can continue, Chair Lewis, if that's
yes,
okay.
please. Thank you,
Okay,
Ben.
thank you. The next, I would say, grouping of testimony that I reviewed was there's a testimony from the Eastern Shore Land Conservancy, as well as testimony from the Council for Smarter Growth. Both of this testimony, they were concerned that some of the principles were too abstract. They requested that, generally that the new principles retain the smart growth idea of protecting prime agricultural lands and rural spaces. That was specifically for the Eastern Shore Land Conservancy. Um, but the general flag I would characterize as them having was that they thought the principles were too abstract. However, my understanding is that MDP is working on a publication to serve as a guide for counties and municipalities to help with implementing the bill, and that this was addressing some of their concerns. But if um, Chair Lewis, I'm not sure if MDP has anything else to add on that.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, any insight there?
Yeah, I can give you a quick synopsis there. First of all, I was really surprised Eastern Shore Conservancy didn't reach out to me directly. I have a great relationship with them. I live on the Eastern Shore. But I believe the amendments that are included in the Senate amendment package addressed their concerns from the standpoint of the working landscapes and how we worked through that with Marbitco and the Rural Maryland Council to address that aspect of it. And I think that the thing that when we have had the opportunity and we have responded to anyone that has asked to present how we are trying to actually, yes, create a more simplified approach that actually we heard through all of the planners that we reached out to in local jurisdictions across the state, that was needed, because the current visions, in fact, were actually very vague and almost impossible to implement. And they've actually, through our meetings with, for instance, the MACO planners group, the planners that we did with roundtables, everyone from that level that actually uses these has been very much in favor of where we're trying to take them. I think the other comment I will make, and it relates to both of these two, and actually a couple of others that you received, is that we've actually, through the development of an implementation guide, which will be non-regulatory, we have the opportunity to create much better and more nimble detail that will allow for best practices to be continuously incorporated and to allow us to actually respond outside of a statute, which is very fixed, to a more contextual situation as you think about the transect from rural all the way to urban. The use of the implementation guide will allow us to give that direction, guidance, and customization to different types of situations. And every time we've had an opportunity to actually sit down with folks and they understand how that's going to work, they've felt very comfortable. And I really feel that would be the case in here too, and actually would have something that's actually more usable from what's on the books now.
Thank you. And I appreciate that. And I'm getting some requests from members, if we could back up just a step
Mhm.
and remind everyone what this great bill does so we can understand the context of the amendments. Ben, would you be so kind and give us a quick overview, bring everyone back up to speed?
Sure. What I, well, the bill is, it's addressing the kind of like the guiding principles for how local jurisdictions are making everyday decisions that relate to their comprehensive plan. And, this is something that when they're updating their comprehensive plan, they will be considering. And it's also being done to update it with, because it was last updated 15 years ago. So.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Ben. I see Delegate Terrasa's hand up. If we could go out of order just for a second to address her questions. Delegate Terrasa, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm wondering if you could just characterize sort of what the shift is. Like, I don't know what overriding what has changed. Like, it was this and it is now this. And I don't know if that's for the department or for Ben.
Thank you. Maybe that would be a good one for Secretary Flora, if you would.
I can do that. And I apologize for jumping around. I actually have a full presentation I'd be happy to share with you as a follow-up. And that's the presentation we've been doing with multiple groups. And so basically, this particular component of the land use code dates as far back as 1992. It's been updated in various points along the way. It went from what were 7 items in 92, an amendment in 2000, and then went all the way to these visions that are on the books in 2009 that are now 12. We're trying to sort of make it much more streamlined, but yet very, very specific to kind of what our priorities and needs are in Maryland. I'm giving you the abridged version in respect for your time, but that is the code. The things that are specifically being changed in this relate to primarily 3 core things. One, there's a name change. We are moving from what were called vision statements. And if you've ever done strategic planning, having 12 vision statements is probably a bit much. Usually a vision statement is an overriding, kind of rule of the future. So that alone isn't really aligned with real planning terminology. And so we're changing it from visions to planning principles, which is much more aligned with how we would be working today in that regard. So there's a name change. It also aligns with the amendment we made last year to the sub-cabinet. So it was the smart growth sub-cabinet, and now it is the sustainable growth sub-cabinet. So we're trying to get everything kind of lined up and more forward thinking. The second item that's changing in the current code is the replacement of these 12 vision statements, which we learned through our 6 roundtables with planners across the state, are really not well used right now with the way they are written and on the books. We are replacing those 12 vision statements with 8 principles that are specific intents. While some of the comments say, whoa, this is too vague, actually, they're much more crisp and very specific to align with the priorities in Maryland today. They also relate to where we are trying to take planning in Maryland from this position of smart growth, which was very successful for what it was around ensuring we protect areas, to being focused on sustainable growth that also captures, in particular, items like equity and resilience that weren't in the previous version. So we're trying this overhaul and update. The third area, well, those are really the 2 big things. It's the replacement of 12 vision statements with 8 principles, to be more concise, more aligned with today's priorities, and to move us from smart to sustainable growth, and the name change. Those are really the big things that you have in front of you. And like I said, I'm trying to be succinct, but I want to also make sure you have everything that you need to make your decisions.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, you just referred to a PowerPoint that you're sharing around. Is that the same as your testimony that you delivered?
It is not. We have a PowerPoint that really walks the audiences that we've been meeting with through, everything from the code to the principles to why, who we met with. We've used that with each of the different groups.
If you could share that with the subcommittee, that would be wonderful.
Absolutely.
So I think,
Andrew will get that over to you. I've
okay,
got it open right now because it's kind of my continual go-to as we talk to various audiences.
Thank you. Delegate Teresa, does that answer your question? All right. Any
Yes,
other
and the
questions?
presentation would be very helpful. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Great. We'll make sure we get that. Thank you. Back to our regularly scheduled program. We're walking through the amendments. Ben, can you pick up where we left off?
Okay, thank you, Chair Lewis. The next grouping, and there's just one small one after this. There was also favorable with amendment testimony from the Maryland Forest Association, Forever Maryland, and Marbidco. This testimony related to natural resource-based industries, natural resource-based business, and as Marbidco was talking about rural working lands, they were concerned about the repeal of existing principle on resource conservation, which concerns things like were mentioned earlier, the resource-based industries, things like forestry and that type of stuff. So Marbitco was talking about having a planning principle on that's like geared more towards agricultural and preservation and conservation, and that was kind of echoed in the testimony mentioned again from the Forest Association and Forever Maryland. The amendments done in the Senate do speak to that and reflect, I think, are mindful of that testimony that was submitted.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's been grouping.
Great. Thank you, Ben. So, uh, Madam Secretary, did you have any sort of additional insight to flesh out?
Absolutely, Madam Chair. I'm actually really pleased with the discussions, negotiations, the outcomes, not only with Marbidco, but Maryland Rural Council, and actually also reflects the comments that we have here from Forever Maryland and from the Forest Association that resulted in actually an amendment to the land principle, which was approved by the Senate. So the land principle, as approved by the Senate as an amendment, was the outcome of all of those discussions, and everyone around the table was in agreement as a result of those discussions. And what we did specifically incorporate, along with Senator Bailey, he was very, very engaged in that conversation, also resulted in the inclusion of working landscapes. The language is in front of you in terms of that amendment, but also specific to those, and then also fisheries. And so we feel like we really captured the essence of those concerns that are expressed by both the forest industry, Forever Maryland, and Marbidco, very absolute, because they were at the table and representing a lot of those interests.
Great. That's the
And I'm happy with it. I mean, I think we ended up in a really good place from all of that with that amendment.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Ben?
Okay, sorry. Thank you, Chair Lewis. I am happy to pull up the amendment briefly to show the members what the language is looking like as.
That's a great idea.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you. Please do that, Ben.
Okay, thank you. And it should be up now. This is I'll just show everyone, help them get oriented with where we are in the bill. It's on page 1, 2. There's two, like I mentioned, there are two parts of the bill, the land use article and then the state finance one, but they're, I believe, the same language in each. Here's the first principle that's being added, and here you can see the amendment as discussed and represented from the favorable with amendment testimony. Lines 21 through 24. The first principle being land, optimizing productivity of working landscapes, including farms and forests and fisheries, and prioritize development in population centers or in proximity to existing infrastructure and facilities.
Thank you.
Okay.
Very helpful. Okay. Any questions? How are we doing, members? Everyone looks bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. Delegate Teresa.
Sorry, I've been out sick for a few days, so I might be
I'm
foggy.
surprised to see you, actually. Are you well enough?
I'm feeling well enough to be here, I should say. But I don't quite understand what we're losing there. So we're losing, it said land, and now it talks about, I guess I just don't understand what this is doing.
Yeah. Let me try to explain that. We had of the 8 principles that we're proposing, one of them is land. And the land principle, as it originally was proposed, did not include working landscapes. We have integrated into that original land principle the language specific to working landscapes, farms, forests, fisheries. So that really captured a lot of those concerns from sort of more of those more rural industries and landscapes and resources in terms of ensuring that those were called out. And that was the result of discussions with all of those entities. So it was an amendment specifically to that land principle, which was always there. We just amended it to include some of these other factors in it.
So, Madam Chair, if I could just ask a follow-up,
Yes, please.
and maybe because I'm sick and foggy, but what is a working landscape?
And that was, you know what, that's very interesting that you asked, because it was one of the reasons in the discussions, I think it was Senator Bailey felt very strongly about us specifying what that is by
Okay, I see.
stating farms and forests. For those that may not know that that's captured in that, but it's primarily landscapes that have a productive use, like farms and forests. Because fisheries aren't land, there was an interest in ensuring that we also captured the notion of fisheries, and so we added that specifically also as a result of those discussions.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Secretary. All right. Ben, where are we now?
We are almost done. I would propose just looking at or mentioning one more piece of testimony so that we've covered it all, and then discussing a final amendment that was made in the Senate, Madam Chair, and then.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, thank you. So the last piece of testimony was from Baltimoreans for People-Oriented Places. They were concerned that there is too much being lost in the conversion from existing visions to the proposed planning principles. They were concerned about the repeal of the growth vision or growth area vision. They had some other concerns about proposed transportation planning principles are not mentioning multimodality, which is prominent in the existing transportation vision. So they were asking that the department draft new principles and come back to this next session.
And how were those concerns addressed, if at all?
Well, I mean, there is a planning principle on transportation, and it specifies transportation networks that are creating efficient, affordable, and reliable access to jobs and housing. So I would say that is pretty general and should, probably cover their concern about the lack of any acknowledgement of multimodality transportation. I think there's also the growth principle or the growth vision that was repealed as to be replaced with the updated principles in the bill. I would say that that's been reflected through these added principles.
Thank you. And the housing affordability, that looks like it's addressed under Principle 3, housing enabling a mix of quality housing types and affordability options to accommodate all. So, Madam Secretary, what's your take?
Well, interestingly, I just found out about this one tonight. And I was only, no one reached out to us. And as I looked at this organization and what they're doing, their values align directly with our values and what we're trying to accomplish with this. I think this is one of those instances where I would love, I am very confident that the things they care about are in each and every one of these 8 principles, even their focus of their name around place. We even included a principle on place that hadn't been there before either. And so I feel like there's great alignment. I think what's probably just because they came into this, and they even admittedly said that they didn't even know there was a land use code that did this. And so I think it's just a need to be more, how we help them be more informed. They indicated that they tune in on our webinars, and so I'm not sure how they would have missed this was going on. But I would say the other thing I would note is that one of the references they make is to the MDOT toolkit. That's exactly what we're developing as the implementation guide that wouldn't be appropriate inside of a statute. And so the implementation guide that I think that they're referencing in their reference of the MDOT toolkit is in fact indeed what we're developing as a compendium to this to help users implement and apply to different situations. It's exactly what we're actually doing outside of the statute. So I feel very comfortable that, I think this is a group that we should include in our future, development of the implementation guide. But I think as far as the statutory need and what we're proposing here, I feel like we have definitely covered their particular areas of interest in our principles as written.
Great. Thank you. And I can see your point. I have great sympathy with the perspectives of this organization, Baltimore People, or for people-oriented places. And I can also see having, we've dived into the bill. I can see where their concerns are reflected in the changes that have been made in the Senate amendments. So, yeah.
Yeah, and Madam Chair, I would add to that, and that's probably what Ben will go to next, is the other amendments that were made are in the intro. And I think those do capture the umbrella statements around quality of life and public. So I'll defer to Ben to introduce that to you all, but I do think it's captured up there rather than bogging down the principles, which we really did want to keep very clear and crisp. But that other amendment that Ben will take you all through now capture some of those broader overriding concepts, I think.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Secretary. Ben, did you want to add?
Yeah, I'll share my screen real quick again, if I may, and then that'll demonstrate the last part of the amendments from the Senate. You can see here at the start of the bill, what this is it's adding intent language, providing that residents should be active participants in the planning and implementation of community initiatives, and sensitive to their responsibilities in balancing and achieving community goals. So this was going to, I think, initially be a principle. However, I think after more discussions, the final product was having this, it would be more appropriate as a concept or a guiding, sort of instruction on the implementation of these principles. And those are illustrated line 7 through 15 there.
Thank you.
And Madam Chair, if I may, I think these concepts of sustainable communities, quality of life, protect the environment, it is sort of that umbrella preamble that came out of those really positive discussions that we sat down and had with some of the various groups and in fact, some of the senators themselves, to be able to capture it this way as almost a preamble than trying to add more principles or to try to, lock on additional things in that aspect of this. It seemed to be the more appropriate way to handle some of those concepts. And everybody came out of that, once again, I think, very positively and in agreement to handle it that way.
Terrific. And I see specific reference to residents should be active partners in planning and implementation of community initiatives. So I think that centering resident perspectives here very explicitly is a real advantage of the amended version. So thank you, Madam Secretary. Thank you, Ben. Are there any questions from members? Delegate Lehman, was that raising your hand or pushing up your glasses? Okay, great. Thank you. Well, and if there are no further questions, Ben, do we have the opportunity here to adopt the Senate amendments into the House version? What do you,
Mhm.
okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair Lewis. So, up to the will of the subcommittee.
I'd be willing to entertain a motion to adopt the Senate amendments into the House version of the bill, and that's House Bill 286. Oh, before we vote, I see Delegate Terrasa's hand up. Delegate Terrasa?
So, thank you, Madam Chair. My sense is they're fine and probably helpful, but since we're not voting on the rest of the bill today, would it be possible just to take a closer look at those and before the next meeting, or do you feel like we need to put those on now?
I don't feel any pressure. We're halfway through session and we've voted 2 bills out of subcommittee. I mean, who's feeling pressure? Delegate Long, please go
I
ahead.
was gonna move the amendments.
Okay, thank you, Delegate Long.
Like to
Is there a
second.
second? Okay.
Second.
So, second, great. So what we can do here is adopt the Senate amendments and then take our time and think this through before we move on the bill as amended. Would that be a comfortable stance for the subcommittee? If anyone feels strongly otherwise? Okay, then we'll take up Delegate Terrasa's suggestion. Ben, does that make sense? Can we do that?
That's fine, Chair Lewis. I can get yes, the amendments will look like the version that they're going to be the same, of course, and the bill is a cross file, so it will be the same language that we've looked at, but we can certainly go from there once the amendments are incorporated in the House bill.
Thank you. It might make it easier going down the line. The Senate bill is now in the House. It got read across and it'll be scheduled in ENT soon. Okay, so if we conform the 2 bills now, well, that because the will of the committee seems, favorably inclined. So if we were to make a decision to move further, that would save a step, I think, right?
Yes, for what it's worth, Chair Lewis, I think generally and again, up to the committee, but I think generally they move the House bills, first or, before crossover, and then the Senate bills will be moved after, would definitely be moved after crossover.
Okay, in that case, I think it makes sense to consider moving the bill as amended. What's the will of the committee? I'd be happy to entertain a motion to move as amended.
So move the bill as amended.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Any questions? Delegate Lehman?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Could you just clarify, because I don't remember this bill in ENT. Have we heard this in the full committee?
Yes, we have.
Okay, I must have been out that day or somewhere presenting one of my bills somewhere, because I am not familiar with this bill. But the idea is we are adopting the Senate amendments, but not adopting the bill as amended. We're not going to entertain passing the bill amended.
Right.
Is that what our goal is today?
Correct.
Thank you for the question. And yes, that's so, the committee can exercise its will here. This is a bill, a departmental bill with that has been heard in ENT. In fact, it was a pretty long hearing with a long list of witnesses testifying. And we have just seen that the Senate has already moved the bill with some amendments that the subcommittee just approved to be incorporated into the House version. So the trend here seems pretty favorably inclined. So what we just agreed to, the will of the committee, was to adopt the Senate amendments, and that was a unanimous. And then the committee seemed interested in moving the bill as amended, and that was properly moved and seconded. And now we're taking questions. So we can, we're the subcommittee. We can do what we feel is
That's
most.
fine. I just wanted clarification. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, ma'am. I see Delegate Terrassa and then Delegate Holmes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My sense is this is a good bill and that I'd be supportive, but I'm kind of uncomfortable voting it today without seeing the presentation, which I think is going to be really helpful from my perspective. I mean, if others disagree, I understand, but I
Okay.
would like to see the presentation before I vote.
The presentation, that's different than the presentation that we already saw in the bill hearing?
Right, I thought that's what the secretary said.
Secretary, could you please clarify what you meant when you said presentation?
I have a PowerPoint, and I know Andrew Wilson's on the phone. He may help my memory. I know we made that full presentation at the request of, I believe it was Triple E. Andrew, do you recall which committee we made the full presentation to?
Yeah, ahead of our hearing in Triple E, we were requested to give them a briefing on sustainable growth in Maryland generally. That presentation, it's been a little bit modified with additional information since then. It is what we want to share with you. That's separate than the testimony we gave at the bill hearing.
We weren't invited to do that full presentation at ENT, but we still essentially just without the visual, went through the specifics of it at ENT when we testified at ENT.
Great, thank you. Delegate Holmes?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think right now we have a motion and a second on the amendments. So perhaps maybe we could move, I think we have a motion and a second on the amendments.
Yes.
We already passed the amendments, Delegate. Yeah. So what was your question?
If it is the will of the committee, then the amendments have been adopted to add on to the House bill.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Right. And if the committee is not going to be moving forward on the House bill, then we could move the House bill next week, or we could make a motion to move the House bill as amended, or wherever the will of the body is. That's all I was going to suggest, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And to my colleague Delegate Holmes, who is a seasoned subcommittee chair, I say thank you. Just to make sure I give everyone a chance, Delegate Long, your hand is up.
Yes, ma'am. I believe I made a motion to move the bill as amended, if I'm correct. Am I sure somebody else heard that motion too? If I may be wrong. Y'all have been doing this longer than me.
Yes,
Okay.
you
The bill is
did.
amended.
And it was moved and properly moved and seconded, in
I believe
fact.
that's the point of question then, Madam Chair.
Yes. So we are in a posture to vote on this bill. The bill has been amended unanimously. The House bill has been amended to conform to the Senate bill unanimously. And a motion was made to move the bill, and it was properly seconded. So I think we're ready to vote. The committee is ready to vote. So with that, I'll say all those in favor of moving the House bill as amended, say aye.
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 Any opposed?
No,
Any questions? Any discussion?
I don't have enough information, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Okay. With that, I think the bill has passed. Ben, am I right?
Yes.
That's correct, Chair Lewis. I can take a roll call vote if you'd like, but whatever, my understanding is that you have a majority vote on.
Okay. Great. I think this is the third bill we've moved and we're only in week 6. Well done. Okay. This is a good bill, and it'll help our planning
Groundbreaking.
department proceed with their work. Thank you, Madam Secretary. Thank you to your team for being with us.
Thank you all. Thank you for your time today. Thank you.
Yes,
Bye-bye.
ma'am. All
Madam,
right.
you still get the presentation?
Yes, we asked for it already, and the secretary said she would send it already.
Yeah.
Delegate Lewis, our Chair Lewis, I will send you a PDF of the presentation that you can send out to the
Send me?
subcommittee members.
We'll get
That
that
sounds
over.
great.
Get that
That
over to
sounds
them.
great, Andrew.
Yep, we'll get that right over to you tonight. And if anyone wants us to walk them through it, we're happy to.
Well, thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you for your time.
And my
Thank you.
staffer, Jared, will make sure as soon as that PowerPoint hits our inbox, he will forward it to the subcommittee.
Awesome.
All right, Jared?
Good evening.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you all. Good evening.
Bye.
Good night. All right, we are on. It's okay. Let us move on to back to the regularly scheduled agenda. We were going to start with House Bill 80, so we'll just move back to the top of the agenda. House Bill 80, transit-oriented development, and for that we have our good friend Patrick Tracy as the analyst. Patrick, would you be so kind and walk, now this bill was heard about 3 weeks ago. We had a discussion in the subcommittee on the bill last week where we talked about, everyone got a chance to share their perspectives, and we had a chance to discuss some amendments. And since then, more work has been done on the bill. The MDOT has had many conversations with stakeholders and with some members of the subcommittee. And I think we're ready now to dive into another discussion and really look at the bill in its current posture. So Patrick, would you be so kind and walk us through? And before I do that, it might be helpful to pull up the reprint, which was emailed to all of you. Patrick, I'm not sure if you can do that, but maybe someone
I had
could.
emailed it to Jared.
Yes, okay.
It should be the
So-
reprint for House Bill 80.
So let's do that. Jared, could you help us and share your screen with the House Bill 80 reprint? Yeah, I said, could you help us out by sharing your screen and sharing the House Bill 80 reprint?
Yes.
Remember the reprint we looked at earlier?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. So Jared's going to pull that up so that we can all see the same thing.
And we're just going through this. This is the like you said, the current status.
Yes, Patrick, that's right. We just want to get level set on where the posture of the bill is in now with the feedback and amendments and all the discussion that's happened. So while Jared is pulling up the reprint, let's jump into questions. Delegate Tarasa, I see your hand up.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just wanted to check because the other bill said for discussion only, and so that's what I was kind of anticipating on this one. If we
It says discussion only.
okay, but I thought the other one said that also, but maybe I'm wrong.
Well, the subcommittee was ready to vote.
Okay, well, I'm just asking, I guess, if we're gonna vote this.
I
Would
think
it-
this bill is too complicated to vote, and there are
Okay,
lots of moving
thank
parts,
you.
which is why we're taking the time to go through it. And
Great.
Jared, that looks great. Can everybody see the reprint? Jared, you might want to close your left side ribbon, if you can. So all that we're seeing is the bill. Click on the little X next to all tools. And while you're working on that, Patrick, could you go ahead and start walking us through, and Jared will respond and move as you tell him to.
Okay. Yeah. Well,
Jared, click
I-
click the X, please, and remove the All Tools ribbon. All I want to see is the bill. I don't want to see anything else on the screen.
he's right there.
There we go.
There.
Okay, Patrick, sorry about that.
And may want to make it a little larger if you can too. I've got my copy here, but
Can you expand the size of the document, please, Jared? So you can go to the upper left, the hamburger, 3 lines, upper left, click. There should be a zoom. No, there's no zoom. Maybe your instincts were right. Go over on the right, upper right, there's 3 breadcrumbs. Click on the breadcrumbs. Nope.
I think if you just hit Control Plus, it might zoom in.
Control plus. This is a new version of Adobe.
all right, that's
There we go.
better.
Jared, that looks great.
Thank you, Jared.
Those Gen Zers.
Okay, now if we go down, Jared, I think you want to go down to page 3. We'll come to our first amendment. This is an amendment these are the provisions that were added either by amendment or were in the bill, but they do not apply to charter counties. This makes them applicable to charter counties because the whole article really doesn't apply to charter counties unless they're expressly put in by this provision. So this adds them into charter counties. There's a similar provision later on in the document, similar amendment that does the same thing for Baltimore City. So we can go past there. Go down, and it's a little hard, Jared, with the page numbers because amendments kind of make their own page numbers. Keep going down past this laundry list.
Can you hear Patrick?
Okay,
But you have
if we could see the top part of page 4 of 9, that would be helpful. Okay, now this is the off-street parking provision that we discussed quite a bit the last meeting. And the department, these are mostly the department's amendments. This drops it down from 0.5 to 0.25 miles, which I believe the subcommittee had discussed. And then we limited it to rail transit station that receives at least hourly service on average from 8 a.m. till 6 p.m. And by the way, Madam Chair, I think we've got Matt Michler on from MDOT2. He might be
Yes.
helpful.
Thank you so much. So, Matt Michler, Mr. Michler, would you be so kind and walk us through this provision? So you can see the screen, the parking provision, please. Thank you.
Sure. Good afternoon, Matt Michler, Director of Government Affairs for MDOT at the Secretary's Office. To my right is Drew Morrison, Senior Policy Analyst, works on policy. As for this provision, I think, as I've discussed with many over the past couple of weeks, the provision as it originally came in was very broad. So the effort here was to narrow both the area around the rail transit station where this parking minimum exemption would apply, and also tie it more towards those stations where there's a frequency of transit that would support good and productive TOD development. Also, with this standard of from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday hourly service, there's also a higher likelihood that the station is going to have connecting transit and be in a more active area, a more developed area.
Thank you. Okay.
And we will see later similar language later on. Actually, next.
Okay, so shall we keep scrolling as you walk? Oh, sorry, I see Delegate Terrasa's hand up. Let's take questions as we go.
Okay,
Right.
that was part of my question.
Yeah,
So
'cause it'll get.
I want to say, I really appreciate the department working with me and keeping me informed about some of this stuff. I'm wondering, and I may have received one, but I haven't had a chance to look, whether we have any sense of what this does cover now, like is there a map or something that shows what we've narrowed this to? Because I think this is a great improvement and reflects sort of the intent of what they're trying to do here. So I think this is probably good, but it would be great to know what is still included and what's not.
Mr. Michler?
Yes, we can certainly follow up with the subcommittee on a map. I understand that this is a discussion period for this bill, so we can look to put something like that together.
And I think to be clear on the types, what has been specifically excluded. So the Brunswick line, the Mark Brunswick line is not eligible. The Mark Camden line is not eligible. The Mark Penn line is only eligible within the core service between Washington Union Station and Baltimore Penn Station. So the northern portion north of the city would also not be subject to this provision. But the WMATA system, the core MTA, light rail and metro subway systems, and that heart of the Mark Penn line would be subject to this, and the other language you'll see in the two other provisions down the page.
Okay, thank you. And I don't know about the rest of you all, but I hear that, but I can't picture that whatsoever. I'm not sure I know where any of those lines are and even which ones are in my county. So again, I think this is probably a really good change here, but I would like to be able to see it. And so I appreciate the map coming.
We will provide, and to be clear, it would not include any stations in your district.
Okay, but I still, yeah, still, thank you.
I just want to make sure I understand. Did you, was that you, Mr. Meikler, or was that, sorry, who was that?
That was Mr. Morrison.
Morrison.
Oh, hi. Okay. I just wanted to make sure I heard you, and I wanted to underscore so that it's clear. This provision applies only to the WMATA system? Yes.
Yes.
To the MARC line from DC Union Station to Baltimore Penn Station?
Correct. The Penn line along
That's
the
the Penn
Northeast
line?
corridor. Yep.
And what else?
And Metro Subway and Light Rail MTA.
So Metro Subway runs through Baltimore City and part of the Baltimore City, Baltimore County line over by the Owings Mills area?
Yes.
And then what was the last one?
And the MTA Light Rail from Baltimore County through Baltimore City into parts of Baltimore County and Anne Arundel County.
So the MTA Light Rail, which goes from like Hunt Valley in Baltimore County down through the city. Where's the stop in Anne Arundel?
So there are two termini for the light rail. There's Cromwell in the Glen Burnie area, and then there's BWI Airport.
Right, of course, right. Okay. Is that everything?
Again, we will be sure to get a more comprehensive map with these systems and showing what is still in, but from my analysis, and Drew would know better than me, yes, that should be everything.
Okay.
And Madam Chair, correct me if I'm wrong, Matt and Drew, but this would also apply to the purple line when it opens, and if it's rail, the red line.
Yes.
Yes.
So yes, thinking prospectively, it would also include purple and red lines. It just because they're not open yet, not really thinking to those.
Thank you so much. Just to make sure we answer your questions, Delegate Terrassa, and then we'll go to Delegate Lehman.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out, like, the MARC does stop in Howard County, but I think that the provision that says that receives at least hourly service on an average of 8 to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday probably fixes that piece. But since I'm more concerned about this overall than just about Howard County, but MARC does stop. We do have stops in Howard County, so.
Correct, and I think the comments from Mr. Morrison were speaking to the fact that it's not hourly service from 8 to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday. There is a MARC station there, it just doesn't meet that additional component.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Delegate Terrassa, did that address all your questions? And then we will expect a visual, picture from MDOT. Okay, thank you. Delegate Lehman, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I heard correctly that none of the Camden line would be included? And is that just based on the fact that it doesn't have that hourly service Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m.? Or what was that decision based on? I'm just curious.
Please go ahead.
Correct. It's because it doesn't meet that frequency of operation condition.
Okay. But if it ever did in the future, obviously that would change.
Correct. Yes, and that's part of the beauty, I would say, of this language is that as the system continues to develop and it is, more and more frequent use of it and built out, we have the ability to consider new sites.
Okay, fair enough. Mr. Tracy, could you go back to your statement about what does or doesn't pertain to charter or non-charter counties? I don't remember discussing that before. Could you?
Well, it was in some testimony. This is the whole land use article. The land use article, unless it explicitly says so, does not apply to charter counties or Baltimore City. So this provision on page 3 of 9 that's added by the amendment in 1401.
Can we go to that page?
Jared, can you hear us?
I'm having a little issue.
Okay, what do you need?
I'm going to try and turn up the volume a little bit so it doesn't interfere.
Okay. But if you can hear me, could you try this? Could you try scrolling up to the previous page, please? Maybe I'll just yell. I'll just be the relay. When to stop? When do we stop, Patrick?
Keep going.
Keep going.
Stop.
Stop.
Perfect.
Okay.
See,
Did
by
you-
adding these in, and these are the new language that we are adding that we were just looking at. Or we were just about to look at.
Beginning, I'm sorry, Patrick, beginning where and ending where?
With the new
I can
language
see
in
this. I wish
clarity-
it were a little bigger, but with the underlying language, can you tell us what
Yes.
line we're starting on and ending with?
Well, there are no line numbers, because it's an amendment. But,
Oh, right, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the enumeration, the 10, 11, 12, okay.
Right.
So
the
beginning with
paragraphs
what,
11 through 13.
11 to 13.
Those are the new languages we were about to look at. And
Okay,
and
so-
those do not apply, that if we didn't put them in here, they would not apply to charter counties.
Okay, you're gonna have to repeat that. I'm trying to get my mind around it. If we didn't put them in there, if we have like a double negative, they wouldn't apply to charter counties.
Right.
And you're speaking specifically of the mixed use
Yep.
development, the limitations on mixed use development, state-owned land, priority transit oriented development. Is that it? Those 11, 12, and 13 in all
Yeah.
caps?
And these are the provisions that are in the bill. And they wouldn't apply to charter counties if we didn't add them to this provision of law.
They wouldn't apply, but by putting them in here in this amendment, they now do apply.
Correct.
And where, someone from the governor's office, could you explain that rationale? What changed? Why did you rethink this? Or were you just not
I think it
aware
was just
that
an
it had to be?
oversight.
Did you always intend this, but you weren't aware you had to say it if it involved a charter county?
I'm gonna fall on the sword for this one. I used to work in this article a lot, actually. I should have remembered that we needed to do this. It was always the intent that this apply broadly to charter counties, Baltimore City. This also brings in code counties just by the operation of another provision in the land use article. So it was always intended to apply statewide. We just missed it in the drafting.
Because if you hadn't, again, to reiterate what Mr. Tracy just said, without doing that, that would have been like an oversight essentially. When you
It would have been an oversight.
You intended it to be all along,
Yes.
but then there was a recognition. Okay, all right. I just wanted to be clear, because I live in a charter county, and when Mr. Tracy called that out, I thought, wait a minute, what did I miss? I didn't recall this conversation from last time. Thank you. That's all for me for now. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Delegate. Okay. Any other questions on the items we've reviewed so far?
None.
Okay, great. Let's keep moving. So let's go back to where we were. Jared, if you could forward to, we were on the parking provision. We were here. And so, Patrick, are you ready for us to keep moving?
Yeah, let me see. Yeah, down just a little bit.
Okay, go down just a little bit, Jared, on this page.
To new subsection E.
If you hear me, can you say so, please, Jared? So you can't hear me. I said, please scroll down just a little bit. Okay,
Perfect.
thank you. Okay, Patrick, is this where you want us to be?
Yes.
All right, please go ahead.
Well, this provision, the subcommittee and through discussions thought that the original language here was too broad, too wide open, and narrowed E and state that a local jurisdiction zoning regulation shall allow mixed-use development land designated for residential or commercial within half a mile. And then the same language of rail transit station that receives at least hourly service from 8 to 6, Monday through Friday. And that addresses the mixed-use development around the rail stations. And then another zoning provision in F for, this is not the last version of this, but okay, I can probably talk our way through it. for state-owned land, around the rail transit station, legislative body, again, they're narrowing this. May not impose restrictions on land use, parking, site configuration, structure right, blah, blah, blah. If the land, can we go down a little bit? It's subject to a TOD plan approved by the Department of Transportation. We actually have another piece going in. This would be paragraph 1. I don't know if MDOT has the one, the most recent one. I think they probably do. And then 2, we're still working on language to the effect that that this provision can't be construed to prohibit the denial of permits based on other reasons, including environmental considerations, school capacity rules, things like that. We're still working on that language, though.
Okay, so we've just gone over sections E and F. And quickly, let's stop there and see if we have some questions. I see hands. The first hand I see is Delegate Terrassa, and then we'll go to Delegate Naraki. Please go ahead.
Can I defer to Delegate Naraki, because I think he's probably going to raise the concern I have.
Okay,
Then I'll go.
go ahead, Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A lot of pressure there, Delegate Terrassa. I don't know if I'm going to necessarily, but I am curious why Section E is not conforming to the section above. So why we've decided that 0.25 miles is appropriate above, but why we think that a half a mile is more appropriate here. And then I do have one other question, Madam Chair, after that one, if that's okay.
Well, they're talking about 2 different things here. Above, they're talking about parking. Here, they're talking about mixed-use development zoning in E. And then F, we're talking about restrictions on land use.
Right. No, and I understand we're speaking about 2 different things, Patrick. I get that. But, you know, if we're concerned about sort of issues with parking and other kinds of density issues, I'm not sure why, you know, 0.25 is good in one section, but 0.5 is better in with respect to something else. I'm not tracking that.
Would MDOT like to answer?
Certainly, and I'm actually going to defer to Mr. Morrison for this.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And I think we're trying to conform in 2 different ways to sort of the policy framework that's emerged. When we look at what Baltimore City and Montgomery County have done vis-a-vis exemption from parking requirements, both of them looked at that quarter mile around transit. And you can think that that's the area where the greatest sort of mode shift that the transit provides is strongest. And that as you start to get a little further out, you know, maybe you might need a bit more parking because you're not really on top of that transit. Meanwhile, the transportation article has for some time defined transit-oriented development at that half-mile radius around the station. And to the extent that mixed-use activity is really sort of the core of what one of the key pieces of what makes development transit-oriented, because it sort of matches that all-day characteristic of the transit. That's the idea of why we're modeling on half a mile here. So even though distinctions within the code here, trying to tie to other policy decisions that have been made throughout the state.
Okay. I definitely got to wrap my head around that part of it. I do have a little question about the following section, Madam Chair, if that's okay, while we're here looking at it.
Yeah, let's go ahead. Please follow your thought and ask your question.
So with respect to the state-owned land, sort of, you know, I would imagine that, you know, we're at least with respect to what I'm thinking about in my district, it's all one and the same. Whether we're talking about state-owned land, whether we're talking about a rail station, it's all one and the same. So I'm not sure why a similar piece of language, if we think that language is good up above in, say, Section E there, with respect to hourly service and things like that, if that's good there, why would that not be good with respect to some state-owned pieces of land? Again, I'm thinking about the MARC station in my district.
So Delegate Naraki, and I just want to, confirm, I think there is a different version of these amendments, and make a great point. And I want to just be clear that that language is included in F in the revised amendments.
Delegate Naraki, you're basically right. And
Yes.
in the most recent version of the things that I described, that there's a 1 and a 2, that language you're asking about is in there.
Okay, thank you. Well, that answers that question then, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Great. And I'd like to just take the opportunity to make a note of the version we're looking at. So this reprint of House Bill 80 was created at 2:27 p.m. today. So was there a version created, Patrick, after 2:27 p.m. today?
Yes.
You would rather we look at?
Yes.
That would make sense to look at. So is that something we could do? I think to avoid any other confusion, we can certainly, Jared, pull up the later version. Patrick, do you have a sense quickly what time the last one was sent?
403.
So can you find that, please, Jared?
He may or may not have it. I'm going to send it to him now.
Okay, Jared, he's going to send it to us now. Because this is the last one that Jared and I remembered seeing.
And we're actually really close to the end anyway here. But I think it would be a good idea if Jared sent a copy out to the subcommittee.
We can do that. So if you forwarded the recent one to us?
I am doing that as we speak.
Okay, so it should be with us. I would rather get it right here so that everybody feels comfortable they're seeing what we need to see and
That's
not
fair.
have any confusion. All right. So let's just take a second. Delegate Terrasa, would you be comfortable to ask your question without the document up? Because we're just getting the document, okay? Or would you rather wait?
I can start with that. What I'm concerned about, well, first of all, I wasn't clear, but it might be clear once you bring the draft up. Like there was a lot of pronouns there and I couldn't understand like which thing that Delegate Naraki said was actually getting changed. So is it
That's why I want to bring up the document, because I don't want anyone to feel confused. I want us all to be together on the same page.
Okay.
How
And
are we
then
doing, Jared?
I just pulled it up, sharing screen again now.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. That's coming up. And as soon as the subcommittee meeting ends, we will forward this most recent document. Hey, Jared, can you stop 1 second here? I want everyone to see we're now looking at the version of House Bill 80. Jared, slow down. The version of House Bill 80 that was prepared at 4:03 p.m. 4:03 p.m. Does everyone make note of that, please, so we don't have any confusion or whatever later? Everybody got that? Patrick, this is the one we should be looking at?
Correct.
Great. Jared, thank you so much. If you could scroll us down, Jared, to sections E and F where we were just now. And that's like page 6-ish. No, sorry, wrong.
Right there. There you go. Thank you, Jared.
Okay, and now expanded like 400 times. So everybody's eyeballs can absorb it. And just give us
What
one
did
second.
Dylan say it was? Delegate Baylor?
It's
Jared,
in
are you expanding the view?
Control plus. I think it's also in the bottom right corner.
There we go.
All
Okay,
right,
no
Delegate
age,
Naraki,
no
you
age
see in
jokes,
F1,
Dylan.
other language is there.
Everybody comfortable? We can see what we need to see?
Yes,
All
Patrick.
right, thank you, Jared.
And I would
Okay,
like to point out that F2 is what I was talking about. We're still working on this language to clarify that this isn't a blanket prohibition on zoning and the local zoning.
Jared, could you scroll down a little bit, please? Thank you. All right, let's just make sure, going back to Delegate Naraki's questions about section E and the 0.5 mile radius and section, let's do that first. So Patrick and MDOT. And now that we're looking at this is the latest and greatest version of section E. Delegate Naraki, your question was about the rationale for using a 2.25 mile radius in the parking provision. And that's different than the 0.5 mile radius in this provision. So just make sure that you got your question answered. Can we go over this again?
Well, there's nothing different about E.
Okay, Delegate Naraki, you see that?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Okay, so Patrick was saying that this 0.5 mile, Patrick, or maybe it was MDOT, somebody was saying that the 0.5 mile radius in provision E reflects existing code that uses the half mile radius as the sort of TOD sweet spot. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes. Currently in the transportation article, TOD sites are defined as a half mile around transportation facility.
Okay. So Delegate Naraki, that's a little different than the parking radius.
Sure.
How are you perceiving that now?
I guess I can understand the difference there. I still think that there could be circumstances where it may be more beneficial to be a little bit more constrained, a little bit tighter there, that 0.25, but that's certainly maybe a discussion we could have offline about that, Madam Chair.
Okay, great. And discussions will be had. No shortage of discussions around here. All right, but I'm making a note. We'll hold that concern. All right, and come back to it. Thank you so much. Okay, now Delegate Naraki, you were also asking about section F. Is this any different in this 4 p.m. version than it was in the 2 p.m. version?
Yes, I pointed out, and Delegate Naraki saw that we do have his language narrowing down the train stations that he was asking for. And I also should point out that we struck the word adjacent and substituted contiguous, which was determined to be a better word because adjacent has more than one definition, if you will. And contiguous is basically abutting, next to, right next door.
Right.
Thank you. So I'm looking at, okay, right. Let me not look at the printout I have because that still has the word adjacent in it. Yeah, so the version on the screen, the 4 p.m. version, has the word continuous instead. All right. Delegate Naraki, Patrick just explained that this updated amendment reflects or responds to the concerns that you had.
I do have one question about contiguous, Madam Chair, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Patrick, contiguous would not, in this case, just for my clarifying, would not include, say, if there was a state highway in between, correct? Because that is technically state land. So I'm just trying to understand what that means there.
I'm reading, if you give me a second here. Contiguous to a rail transit station. I mean, I don't think this is going after highways at all, but I mean, yeah, that could be state land.
If I may, Patrick, what is in my mind here is if we're thinking about the station that I'm thinking about in my district, you have a rail station, you have a state highway, and then you have a bunch of state land immediately across the street where Martin State Airport and Warfield Air National Guard base is. So I'm just wondering if in this case, if contiguous could be connected by a state highway. I know that's a really specific example, but
I know what you're saying. I'll have to check on this. We're not voting on this today, so
yes, sir.
Good question. I'll check on that for you.
Thank you.
All right, great. Delegate Naraki will keep following up and get clarification for you. Thanks, Patrick. Okay, Delegate Terasa had her hand up a little while ago.
Yes, I still have a question. Thank you.
Yes, please go ahead.
So, so first of all, this is much improved. I like the hourly station, and that it doesn't just, like, I like the phrasing of it better, but it's still, I'd like to see the 0.25 here as well. I also want to answer the contiguous versus adjacent, but what I thought Delegate Naraki was going to say, and maybe he did, is that the problem here is on line 23. And that is local jurisdiction zoning regulations shall allow mixed development on land designated for, I understand the residential, because that's something that the locals have already determined is fine for people to live in. But when you have commercial, and I don't know how that commercial is defined in the state code versus a local code, but if you've got commercial, that could be industrial uses of all sorts and could be, you know, it could be that that's, I guess my concern is that that opens it up to areas that might not be appropriate for residential. And this would keep locals from controlling that. And I also don't know how states would control whether there was residential there or not. Other than through an agreement with the developer, there wouldn't be any regulation that kept you from doing residential there.
Who's best prepared to answer that?
I think that's something we can take into consideration and work on while we're waiting.
Yeah, so I mean, because I think the point that Delegate Naraki brought up, and I can't remember in my head, he said it was nuclear waste, but I don't remember what item was in the. Yeah, he's putting his thumbs up. You know, there could be areas that are zoned non-residential because they're not appropriate for human beings to live on, and so this would say the local jurisdiction basically has to allow mixed-use development, including residential, on that land. And so somebody needs to be able to say whether or not that's appropriate for residential. And then the second part, this still, so back to the 0.25 point versus 0.5, this says that a legislative body may not impose, and I like a lot that they were more specific, but it says they can't impose any restrictions on land use classification. Okay. Well, that goes back to whether you can say it's residential or not, but I think that might be part of the point of this legislation. But it also says parking requirements. So now we're back to there being no way to put parking requirements if you're 0.5 away from the station. So I guess my point is this is much improved, but I think there's still some tweaking that needs to be done.
And Delegate Terrasa, did you have some specific suggestion about how to improve this? Patrick and MDOT, please respond to the delegate as needed here. So we
yeah, and MDOT has been really good about meeting with me, and I'm happy to meet with them again rather than go through this all. Like they've been really good and really helpful, and I think really listened to a lot of my concerns. I don't know what to do about that commercial use because my guess is that at least in some locations, what they're trying to get is that commercial use. But somebody has to be able to determine whether that commercial use, which like I said, could be heavy industrial. Like we have stuff in my district that's like, well, I think this committee toured a plant of where they were doing anaerobic digestion, very, very smelly and disruptive to the residential in the area. And this would allow them to do mixed use, high intensity development right next to that. So I think locals are often better equipped to know that, but I mean, I'm happy to get more specific, but I think for the purposes of today, I'm happy to work with MDOT still.
Okay.
Chair Lewis, if I may just briefly respond.
Please, I wish you would.
Okay. And Delegate Strauss, I
Yes,
appreciate all the time you've provided us and working with us on this. I just wanted to kind of maybe touch on that provision specifically. What we were trying to do there is, we thought E, as originally written, may have allowed kind of what you were suggesting. What we're trying to get at is, if the land is designated by the locals, and within a half mile of a rail transit station as zoned for residential or zoned for commercial, and I think our interpretation would be that doesn't include industrial uses, but more of your traditional, you have a strip mall or office building, office park, something like that. If the land was zoned like that, just residential or just commercial, the state or a developer could come in and propose a non-conforming use such as residential where zoned commercial, or the alternative, commercial where zoned for residential. It wouldn't say that the local has to, prove itself to go through the whole zoning process, but the very nature of it being non-conforming as residential where commercial is designated or commercial where residential is designated would not kick the application out on its face. Right, so it's actually much more narrow in how it's intended at least to be applied, and can certainly work on the language.
No, and I think you guys did a good job of narrowing it a bit, but I now have a little bit more questions. But one, you might want to better define commercial. I mean, this is what local zoning code does, so that's why, in my opinion, it's better done by the locals. But you might want to have a better definition of commercial. But also you said non-conforming use. Does this have to go through a non-conforming use process?
No, I'm not speaking technically to zoning and non-conforming use. I'm just saying non-conforming in the sense that, if an area around a rail transit station is currently zoned explicitly for residential use, somebody might be able to propose, hey, a coffee shop right across the street from the rail transit station makes sense because somebody might want to stop and get a coffee.
Right, and I totally appreciate where you're going with that. And I think that makes sense in residential. I think we probably need to narrow commercial.
Be happy to work with you. I'm wondering if, you could say commercial, non-industrial, something to that extent. We were trying to go with general terms, but happy to work with you.
Right, and I guess my fundamental problem with using the general terms is that then who can impose that restriction? Do you know what I mean? Like, that's what the locals are doing. And I do understand that that's what you're trying to get around to some extent. But if you don't make it more specific, if you make it too general, then nobody can control it. And telling a developer they can't develop there once they've purchased the land is like it's a taking. So like you want to be, or at least they'll claim it's a taking. I'm not sure I'd say it is. But I just think you need to be a little more prescriptive there is all. But I'll work with you.
Appreciate it. Happy to work with you.
Great, thank you. Collaboration is good, and it gets us a better product. So thank you everyone for paying attention. We are working late, and I do appreciate that. So I want to thank everybody for hanging in there. Now, any other questions on sections E or F? If not, we can always come back to it, but if not, shall we keep moving, Patrick? Where do we need to pick up?
We're basically at the end. If you go down, 10103 is the same thing that we talked about for charter counties, but for Baltimore City. And then the rest of the bill, which deals with the transportation article and the new fund, is stricken.
Jared, did you hear that?
I did not.
Can we please scroll, please? Say when, Patrick.
Okay, this is the Baltimore City provisions. Same language, making it applicable to Baltimore City.
Okay, keep scrolling slowly.
And then the TOD corridor funds language is stricken for this year.
Okay, keep going, Jared, a little bit. Okay, right here. So is this what you're talking about, Patrick?
Yes. Go slowly because there is one piece that's still left in. It's
Okay,
the procurement piece.
Okay, keep going slowly, Jared.
This goes for about a page and a half.
Okay, so all this is stricken, so keep going. And now we come to some meat, so stop.
This is the provision that exempts transit-oriented development from the procurement article. And as is commonly done in the procurement article, we do some add back ins saying that, okay, transit-oriented development is exempt from the procurement article, but the following provisions still apply. And this is the laundry list here.
Okay,
And
thank you.
I'd be interested in the input from MDOT on this too.
Yeah, can we walk through these, please? Because everyone's seeing this for the first time, so rather than say, here it is, let's just go line by line. All right? So, starting at the top, this Division 2 does not apply. does not apply to transit-oriented development under Title VII. Following provisions do apply, okay?
Right.
So can you help us, please, Patrick? Just go.
Well, they're basically spelled out at the end, collusion provisions, concealment, material facts, that type of thing. For policies and procedures for exempt units or for units that are exempt still have some policies that apply to them, and this is saying that this will apply to TOD also. Non-discrimination, minority business, liquidated damages, if there's breaches, security for construction contracts, I guess, is applicable, and then of course prevailing wage and living wage.
Okay, can we just go through this? And I see you, Delegate Lehman. Jared, could you keep going a little bit, please? Okay, so that's the end of this part, because now that's stricken. So go back up, please, Jared. All right. Thank you, Patrick, for walking us through that a little bit. Delegate Lehman, go ahead, and then we'll go to Delegate Terrassa.
Yeah, I'm trying to get clarity on what's been added back, which is versus what is still being left out. And then I wanted to raise an issue about for it being public construction projects only. I just feel like if private developers are getting, incentives or taxpayer funded, assistance here, that it should apply to private construction. Although I don't, Patrick, I think I heard you just say that all the quarter language is gone. So I don't know if the quarter language is gone, but there's still special taxing district language left. We haven't discussed that, but anyway, can you go back over what's in versus what's out?
No, the special taxing district and the quarter funds are all out.
Well, they are.
Yes.
Okay, so what about this list of like living wage, prevailing wage? It was out and now it's in. Is anything not back in?
Oh yeah, lots of stuff.
Okay, like, well, try us. I mean, I don't,
It could
because,
be anything from bid procedures to, basically this is what's in it from the procurement article based on this draft.
well, how are we supposed to know what's not in it unless we go back to the procurement article and do a side by side? Can someone provide us like a fact sheet or something? I mean, then you're requiring us to like figure out what got left out.
Basically, well, I can tell you this much. The thinking is that getting exempted from the procurement article saves you from a lot of time consuming litigation. But that these provisions were important enough for these TOD projects to make sure that they stayed in. This is a very common type of thing in the procurement article. It's done for P3s. It's done for a whole lot of things. University System of Maryland.
What about prompt payment?
I do not believe prompt payment is in here.
Well, I find that problematic from just a philosophical standpoint.
Well, that may be the case. That's why it's here. Just to think about that and make the judgments.
I mean,
Again, this is not being voted on today.
Well, can you point us to, what part of the, if we're going to do research on our own and see what did not get included, what part of the procurement article are we talking about? Like, is there a part that's like this, like a laundry list like this, and we could do, each of us or whoever wants to and has time could do a side by side?
Well, I don't think you can do a side by side because you'd have to go through the whole procurement article. But if you want to get a sense for how this type of thing works, it might be good to look at 11203 of the state finance and procurement article. Which is where this is drafted to.
Okay, 11203.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, well then maybe we could have the governor's folks speak to why these issues. I mean, I'm a strong proponent of prevailing wage and living wage, MBE, some of these other things. I raised some of these issues in the full committee discussion, liquidated damages policies. That sounds like it's part of prompt payment potentially, but I don't know.
And I can tell you this much, that this was mostly based on the provisions that are in the current law for P3s. MBEs were minority business participation was added on top of that. None of this is sacred, and I think the impetus for the amendment came from the labor parties and labor organizations.
Okay, could I have someone speak to, though, my point about prevailing wage, and for that matter, I guess, living wage only applying to public projects? So in other words, we wouldn't be including, you know, a private project, even if it's on state land, or even if there was some other benefit from, you know, the state or local government. Am I understanding that correctly, that prevailing wage would only be for a public project? And it has this language about public work contracts.
Whoever can answer that, please.
Sure. So and I think Drew has a specific answer to that, just to set a little bit of the tone here. The reason for the whole removal from Division 2 of the State Finance and Procurement article, which is all the procurement pieces, is because, as we understand it, as we've been advised by council, these projects are not subject to state procurement law, but that has created issues, as Patrick noted, in the past around various litigation for various projects. So this is really an attempt to clarify what is already the interpretation, that TOD doesn't follow the procurement article. Where this is coming in, again, as Patrick noted, it ties back to P3s. Many of these provisions apply specifically to P3s. And so we're bringing those back in. From all of them, I'd say that these were things were going to be worked out as part of the agreement with the private developer. That they were always going to be wrapped in. So adding them here, making it explicit, really just helps solidify that. And Delegate Lehman, to your point, and to Patrick's comment, what we're saying with this is Division 2, which is all the procurement elements of the state finance and procurement article, wouldn't apply to these projects, except for these items explicitly stating here. So provisions around collusion, falsification, concealment, et cetera, of material fact. I don't want to, waste the subcommittee's time and read to you, but these 9 provisions would specifically still apply. Everything else then in Division 2 would be cut out.
Okay.
Drew, could you speak to the living wage?
Okay, that's somewhat helpful, but in Roman numeral 8,
Yes.
Title 17, Subtitle 2, prevailing wage rates, public work contracts. So it's not even public contracts. I read that wrong. What does that mean, public work contract? When I think of public work, I think of roads and, I don't even think of public buildings necessarily. Or is that a reference to the Board of Public Works? What does that mean?
So under the code, a public works project is a type of project that receives a certain level of consideration from a state or federal source. And so what the prevailing wage requirement here, and what these references generally do on things like the public-private partnership provision elsewhere in the state finance and procurement article, is say, if this activity otherwise triggers the requirements under these sections of code, as in it meets the state dollar consideration for the prevailing wage law, as in it's required to have a minority business consideration, then that would apply to this process of procuring ultimately that development partner and the set of activities associated with the TOD. But what we've seen throughout the state finance and procurement article is that economic development activities sit in a separate category, because the fundamental nature of how you get to them is different from going out and buying concrete. So what this says is the stuff that we would do in a TOD that would trigger the requirements under the Maryland prevailing wage law, based on, if there's a whole bunch of state money going into a parking garage, there's a whole bunch of state money going into the overall development plan, if it would trigger the requirements under the prevailing wage law, that would be applicable in this procurement.
Okay, so just to clarify, so this is not limited to just infrastructure, first of all.
Our overall intent here in this section, the sort of impetus is, and I'm going to start broader to go to your specific point, is that the procurement of TOD has existed in a very clear space in terms of consistency with economic development and overall legal framework, but it's never been written down. And so what we are trying to do is write down exactly the legal framework that applies to TOD as it exists today. And so to the extent that the development activities in terms of how they were funded would trigger the requirements under the Maryland prevailing wage law, then it would apply to the project.
Well, just one, I find this pretty confusing, but, and I can talk to you more offline, but one final thought that a colleague shared with me is why not put in instead of, you know, of showing what you're putting in, why not, unless the list is longer, why not show us what you're exempting? Because again, now we're going to have to kind of do some detective work to figure out what, and Mr. Tracy said it's just not that simple. You can't even really do a side by side. Why wouldn't you call attention to what you're exempting?
So to help you, or to clarify, I should say, Delegate Lehman, what we're exempting are effectively titles 11 through title 19 of the state finance and procurement article. So that's why it's difficult to show, you know, what we're exempting, and we want to show what's still included, because that's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages when recreated. Title 19, for example, is 20 sections in and of itself. Title 18 is 9 sections. Title 17, special provisions, is subdivided into 9 subtitles itself. So it really is an economy of drafting, and it's consistent with the again, as Mr. Tracy points out, it is consistent with how this was done for the P3 law.
Well,
I think this is the state finance and procurement article. So is it one volume?
Yes.
Yeah, so this is the state finance and procurement article. It's about 2 inches thick. And so I think I can see why we're being told it would be difficult to do a side by side. But I also think, to Delegate Lehman's point, it would be helpful somehow to get a sense of, you know, what is being proposed here. And for that, maybe it would be helpful to see an example from a P3 bill, Patrick. I don't know that those of us who came in 18 or 22 have worked on P3 bills, but would that be some sort of benchmark, some comparison? Because I feel like the issue here is that folks might feel like they're just swimming in the unknown, but a concrete example to compare might be a helpful thing. Is that an option, Patrick, or anyone else?
I'll have to think that through.
Okay.
Our P3 guy is Mr. Michler, and he left us.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, for you get an A for effort. I do appreciate that.
You know that feeling when you're in the middle of the lake and you're just
Right.
swimming, you know,
I
you need
do.
to
I
put your
need
feet on
a,
something solid.
yes, I need a life jacket right about now, but thank you. That is very helpful. And I will just say for my part, I am not, you know, I'm a little bit skeptical of P3s. So that raises a
Point
little bit of
taken.
concern right
But
there.
just-
But that's it for me for now, Madam Chair. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Delegate Lehman. Thanks, everybody. So let's go to Delegate Terrassa.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And fortunately, most of my questions were answered by questions from Delegate Lehman, but just to her point, I just want to clarify, and I agree with her on it'd be better to have what's in than like what's out than in, but I hear what you're saying. But this prevailing wage thing, is it only available in public work contracts anyway? Like, are we removing that prevailing wage from any contracts by doing this? Is, I guess, my question.
No.
We're leaving it as is. Is that
No.
right, Matt?
I apologize for interrupting. Yes, we're leaving it as is. So what is law in Title 17, Subtitle 2 of the State Finance and Procurement article will apply. So it's going to be those covered projects. It's going to be those projects meaning certain state funding requirements. So a good way of thinking about this would be if the state were to engage with a developer on a site, and part of the planning around that was to take surface parking and turn it into a freestanding parking structure that's funded by the state to clean up the site. That is going to be covered by the prevailing wage rates provision because the state is contributing a significant amount of funding there. So it would be a covered project.
Wait, now I'm more confused. Okay.
Okay. Oh.
This is,
Yeah, nothing
all,
changes about Title 17. How it applies in other projects, it would apply.
okay,
To
all of
these
17 is back in.
Title 17, Subtitle 1 and 2.
Okay, but does
The
Title
Roman numerals 7 and 8.
So subtitle 3 through whatever, or do those relate to private contracts or those are all public work contracts?
Subtitle 3, and I'm just doing a quick scan. It's related to steel procurement for public works. Yeah, these are provisions that are otherwise taken out of, again, the P3. And I know I keep coming back to that, and I just recognize that this is tied back to that language and similar treatment. You think about it, there's a consistency of treatment there in these TOD developments and how we're working with private development. And it's just about the relevance of some of these provisions. Most everything that's cut out is relevant to the state acting as a party to the contract, whereas most of the work being done here is work that's going to be done by a private contractor, and the state is really facilitating by working with the site development and the early planning stages. So, Drew, I'm not sure if there's additional.
Yeah, I mean, and certainly understand, because this is getting knee deep in a lot of the minutia of the state finance and procurement article. The intent of why we brought this into the bill to start with was just try to situate the existing practice vis-a-vis TOD procurements. And to clarify the existing legal framework that exists for economic development activities. So if you look at how Medco or the Stadium Authority or certain Department of Commerce activities are handled, and then if you look at public-private partnerships, which are a model, not, we can have the debate about P3s, as Matt said, but in terms of a situation where the procurement itself is about finding that right partner, and then there are certain public policy goals that the state has repeatedly clarified it wants to see executed even in the sort of public-private relationships. So what this is trying to do is put an area of activity, transit-oriented development, that has been happening for many years with a legal framework that was not spelled out in the finance and procurement article, and apply the set of policies that have applied to similar economic development and private partnership activities and clarify the sort of law as it stands. We're not trying to make new law in this. We're just trying to explain how it works. Yeah. If the committee wants to discuss how it could work in the future, we'd happy to do that. In terms of the context of this bill, we're trying to address a gray area that our AGs have raised as a source of risk and concern that has been raised by other parties, and nail that down, and then we could have a conversation about the future in another venue.
No, and I appreciate that, and that's helpful. So is this exactly the same as what's in those other procurement sections? I forget what you said, the P3 and the I forget what the other one was.
It's the same as what's in P3 plus minority business participation.
Okay. All right. So that's good. And then did Doug and Lehman said something about prompt payment and you said that's out?
Never was in.
Oh, it never was in. Okay. All right. So it wasn't like something taken out. Okay. That's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for those questions. I'm looking at the time and I'm wondering, Patrick, how much material is there left to cover?
We've got the 2 ethics bills.
Okay, but in the House Bill 80,
we're done.
Yeah.
it's a miracle. Okay, I think everyone who had questions on House Bill 80, we've touched on them now. Is okay, so unless there's anything else urgent on House Bill 80, which
Can I
we
just-
can come back to. We've been promised some feedback from Patrick and MDOT, questions that folks wanted answers to. So please, Patrick and MDOT, gentlemen, please send those answers to us so we can get them to the subcommittee. We'll have some ongoing conversations to address some specific questions. I know MDOT's been great about reaching out to my colleagues on the subcommittee, and I know you'll keep doing that, and I know my colleagues are open to learning and talking and giving suggestions and getting the best product we can. So if it's okay with everybody here on House Bill 80, let us just, keep working on this. Is there a reason your hand is up, Delegate Terrassa?
Yeah, really
Is there
quickly.
a question that can be answered quickly?
Well, it's just a statement that, or I guess I'm wondering where Mako is on this. My understanding is they still have some concerns, but could we maybe invite them to the next, so we understand their concerns or see here if they're resolved?
Can someone answer the question, is Mako,
Their concerns are not resolved.
Okay, thank you for explaining that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Ben, I see your hand. Oh, no, that
Okay,
was.
thank you, Chair Lewis. If I
Okay.
may, I did invite Mako because I thought they, just if it's helpful, I did invite them because they also submitted an amendment for one of the bills with the family child care homes. So they saw I presume they saw the agenda with this one, but yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Madam Chair, for what it's worth, they told me they weren't invited. But I may have just gotten, slipped through the cracks. So I just would hope they could be part of the conversation next time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ben. Maybe there was a miscommunication or maybe.
They can always ask, and we're pretty liberal about that.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't have excluded anyone. So, okay, thanks, everybody. Now, so on House Bill 80, folks feeling like we've done a deep dive, but we have more follow-up to do, which we will do. Okay? Delegate Holmes, did I see your hand up?
Yes, Madam Chair, I was just thinking, because of the time, perhaps we can adjourn and come back next week with the other bills, perhaps, Madam Chair?
Okay, yeah, thank you for asking, Delegate Holmes. We had 5 bills on the list. And yeah, it is almost, it's pushing 9 o'clock. So I think we have the power to make a decision here, the subcommittee, and
Yes, you do.
in its wisdom. So I'd be happy to, and also we've kept several experts on the line just hanging out, Miss Daly from Ethics and some others. So why don't we do this? I'd be happy to entertain a motion to adjourn and return to the bills we haven't. Okay, it's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, the motion to adjourn's been properly moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Like.
All right, everybody, we'll be together again. We'll keep